Boldwood presents The Sister-in-Law, written by Joanne Ryan, and read by Sophie McCall, Gemma Lawrence and Julie Maisie. Chapter 1. The rain lashes down, fierce rods of water that hit the road and bounce back upwards with force. The windscreen wipers whisk manically backwards and forwards across the glass, but make little difference to the poor visibility. Slick with rain, the road is awash, and the tyres skid and slide across the rivers of water as they stream across the tarmac and pool in the gutters, but the drains are already full and can accommodate no more. There's no moon tonight, and even if there were, the cloud cover is so dense that no light would penetrate them. Tall and alien-looking, the streetlights edging the road are so high up as to be useless, and the feeble illumination they throw has all but vanished by the time it reaches the ground. After a week of unrelenting rain, the river is about to burst its banks, and what was once a calm and tranquil body of water is now a furiously flowing torrent. An amber weather alert, which will imminently turn to red, is in operation, and no one in their right mind would be driving along the road on a night like this, let alone speeding. But the people in that car are not in their right minds, or at least one of them isn't. A desperate struggle between the passenger and the driver for control of the steering wheel is taking place. Wrenched this way and then that, two pairs of hands grapple for control, and the car veers wildly from side to side as it races along. One final shuddering lurch, and the car plummets nose first into the water, where it sits for several seconds, appearing to float, before silently sinking beneath the black waters. Moments later, a car appears around the bend in the road. The driver of this car is driving well below the speed limit, and the headlights of the first car, as it slowly sinks beneath the water, glare through the darkness of the night, straight into his eyeline. Puzzled, it takes him a moment to realise what he's looking at, and when he does, he pulls the car over to the side of the road, turns off the engine and telephones the emergency services. Once he's finished the call, the driver, a man in his 60s on his way home from visiting his daughter and her new baby, makes no attempt to get out of the car. He knows that there's no chance of him being able to rescue anyone from the water, because he's not a strong swimmer, and even if he were, on a night such as this, he'd be more likely to drown himself than save anyone's life. Besides, the emergency services made it quite plain that he should make no attempt to go into the water himself, but to leave it to the professionals. He sits and waits patiently, checking the rearview mirror for the lights of the emergency vehicles, praying that they come soon, although he's certain that no one will be getting out of that car alive. When the blue flashing lights finally come into view, he heaves a sigh of relief. He no longer has to feel responsible. It's in their hands now. Pulling up his hood, he clambers out of the car and jogs through the rain to the team of rescuers climbing out of the vehicle, their torches and lights illuminating the area. By the time he reaches them, he's already soaked through, and he points, shouting to tell them where he saw the car go into the water. A searchlight mounted on one of the vehicles is swung around, and he watches as it pans across the river. Several of the firemen run towards the water, converging on the bank, and as he looks in their direction, he sees them pointing to an area of water that appears darker under the glow of the searchlight. It's a body. But then the shape moves, and what looks like an arm goes up in the air, and he realises that the shape is alive. There's a survivor. Chapter 2. Megan. Bright light sears itself onto my retinas as I open my eyes, and I quickly close them. Steeling myself to open them again, I inhale a deep, shuddering breath, immediately regretting it, as the effort sends a piercing pain from the base of my neck to the very top of my head. I lie perfectly still, and eventually the pain subsides. A hangover. That's what this is. A vicious reminder that I can't tolerate alcohol of any sort anymore, because it leaves me incapacitated for days, the aftermath far outweighing any fleeting pleasure I may possibly have derived from drinking. Something must have happened to make me drink. Something very bad indeed to make me break my own self-imposed rule of no alcohol, if it can possibly be avoided. Except, it doesn't feel much like a hangover, because those headaches used to pound the inside of my skull as if a sledgehammer were being wielded. A hangover headache is unremitting, no matter how still I lie. There would be profuse vomiting too, that would continue long after every morsel of food had been ejected from my stomach. So, not a hangover. I feel hot, and my body feels constricted, as if something heavy is weighting me down. Panic suddenly engulfs me, my brain shouting at me that I've been abducted and am tied up somewhere, trapped, unable to escape. I'm now a madman's prisoner and have been taken to the middle of nowhere, where I will never be found and will live the remainder of my days as a captive, at the mercy of my abductor. Horrors of what will be done to me crowd my mind, and I tell myself to calm down, to stop dramatizing. I force myself to move my hands and spread my fingers, and feel softness beneath them. Slowly opening my eyes just a fraction, I see the outline of a cotton sheet, the pale blue of a blanket on the top of it. It's pulled up to my neck, holding me snugly in place. I press my fingers down, and there's the familiar feel of a mattress. I'm in a bed. But not my own bed, because as I move my fingers, I feel the edges of the mattress on each side. This is a single bed, and I have a king size. We have a king size. Opening my eyes fully, I see that the light that felt as if it was blinding me is a long, narrow ceiling light. There's a brown patch next to it. I focus on it and decide that it's evidence of a leak at some time. Murmurings of conversation float into my consciousness. The sound of activity, the click of heels on a hard floor, the rhythmic beep of something. A monitor. Or maybe it's a mobile phone. I turn my head, ignoring the pain that screams at me to stop, and try to gauge where I am. A large room. White walls, beds, some with 3/4 length curtains pulled around them, showing only the wheeled legs of the bed. A hospital ward. I try to remember how I got here, when I arrived, why I'm here, but there's nothing. A blank. Have I had surgery? Some sort of procedure? Possibly, but if I have, I can't remember. Maybe this amnesia is part of the after effects of the anaesthetic. Oh, hello. You're awake. How are you feeling? A face appears in front of me, peering down at me. Brown eyes, flushed skin, a tiny hole in her eyebrow where she's had some sort of piercing. Brown hair scraped back from her face. A young, open face, 20, maybe younger. She's smiling as she waits for an answer, but it's a professional smile that doesn't reach her eyes. Where am I? Satin ward. Why? Don't you remember? She asks, not answering my question. Can you tell me your name? Megan Fordham, I say, without having to think about it. But I don't know why I'm here. You've been involved in an accident. We think you're going to be fine, but we're going to keep you in for a few more days to keep an eye on you. I feel cold fingers on my skin as she takes hold of my wrist to take my pulse, and although I know she's only doing her job, the touch is comforting. An accident? So not an operation. I close my eyes. Rain beating against a windscreen flows across my closed eyelids, the hypnotic back and forth of wipers attempting to sweep the water away. I was going somewhere. I know that much. So it must have been a car accident, because what other sort is there? A car accident? She gently places my hand back down on the bed. Yes. Are you going to be okay? Bruised, but intact? That professional smile again. She pulls the sheet and blanket tighter, tucks it around me, smooths it down. What happened? I can't remember what happened. She hesitates, her eyes refusing to meet mine. Sister's going to talk to you shortly. She'll explain everything. I grab hold of the blanket and push it down and try to pull myself upright, to sit up. It's best if you stay laying down. I ignore her, ignore the pain driving through my skull with every movement. I feel powerless laying down and I can't stand it. She sighs and after a moment helps me to sit upright, pushing the pillows behind me to hold me up. Better? She asks. Yes. The room spins and I have the urge to vomit, but I swallow it down. The pain in my head gradually recedes to a manageable level. How did I get here? Sister will explain. She's backing away, eager to escape my questions. Why can't you tell me? Sister will talk to you, she repeats, turning to leave. But she's not quick enough, because I see it. The flicker in her eyes. I've seen that look before, and I know what it means. There's bad news coming, and she's not going to be the one to tell me it. I awake, my head lying awkwardly to one side, my arm dangling over the side of the bed. Wetness on my face where my mouth has been gaping wide. I've been drooling. I remember. Sister was going to tell me why I'm here, but despite being desperate to know, I fell asleep. I wipe my face, haul myself upright, and this time the pain isn't so bad. It's bearable. How long have I been asleep? Minutes? Hours? I have no idea. A plastic jug and beaker sit atop the square cupboard next to the bed. I twist my body around awkwardly, reach across and drag the jug towards me. I slop water from the jug into the beaker, splashing it onto the top in the process. Picking the beaker up with shaking hands, I gulp down the water, wincing at the pain in my throat as I swallow. The liquid hits my stomach and I have to fight down the urge to expel it. I should have drunk more slowly. Pushing the beaker back onto the top of the cupboard, I flop back onto the pillows and slowly take in my surroundings. There are 4 beds against the opposite wall, and the curtains on the beds either side of me are drawn, restricting my view to a narrow strip down the middle of the ward. I can just make out what looks like the edge of a door frame at the end of the ward. I stare at the blue concertina fabric, or is it paper, and wonder who are occupying the beds next to me. It seems quieter than when I woke the first time, and there's a faint smell of food in the air. I have no idea of the time, but there's daylight coming in from the windows. Maybe this is the after-lunch lull. I manage to pull myself upright and lean forward, but can't see any nurses or doctors, and then remember that there should be a call button somewhere close to hand. Mum always had one nearby in her many stays in hospital. Strangely, the memory pleases me, although Mum is dead, because it means that I haven't completely lost my memory. I pull back the covers and swing my legs over the side of the bed. The hospital gown I'm wearing has rucked up around my waist, and I quickly pull it down to cover my nakedness, although no one is watching. There's a cord draped over the headboard, and I grab hold of it and press the red button in the centre. It makes no noise, so I press it again, aware that I'm being impatient, but not caring, because I've waited long enough. No one comes, so I press it again, keeping my finger on the button this time. Somewhere it will be buzzing. 2 nurses appear at the end of the ward, and they stand in the doorway talking to each other. What's taking them so long? I keep my finger on the buzzer, and after a moment, one of them peels off and heads towards me. She's wearing navy blue. This, I know, means she's a sister. You're awake? She approaches me, removes the call button from my hand and drapes the cord over the headboard before walking to the end of the bed. She removes the clipboard that's hooked over the end and studies it. How are you feeling? Not great. Doctors prescribed you some painkillers, so they'll help with the aches and pains. You managed to drink something? She says, spotting the beaker. That's good. What happened to me? You were involved in a car accident. A memory stirs again. Rain. Darkness. Was I driving? Did I hit someone? Oh, I don't know if you were driving. The police haven't given us that information, but I do know you didn't hit anyone. The car you were in went off the road and into the river during the storm. You were rescued from the water. A memory of my hands on the steering wheel fires itself into my brain. I was driving. Or was I? Because there are other hands on that wheel too, each of us trying to gain control of the car, fighting for control. I wasn't alone. Where's Rick? She doesn't answer. Where's my husband? He was with me. I'm sure he was. Or is my memory playing tricks on me? She hooks the clipboard back onto the end of the bed and comes round and sits down next to me. I'm very sorry, she says, taking hold of my hand. But I have to tell you that your husband never regained consciousness from his injuries. Her words don't make sense. Can't make sense. Dead. Rick's dead. How can he be dead? The doctors tried their very best, but sadly there was nothing they could do. She pats my hand, her fingers warm, mine ice cold. I stare down at them. Is there someone I can call for you? She asks. A family member? A friend? No, I manage to say, after a moment. There's no one. Chapter 3. Megan. This is only the second funeral I've been to in my entire life. The first was my mother's, 2 years ago. To the day. I knew that, even as the date for Rick's funeral was suggested, but I didn't bother to change it. Even though Elaine tried to persuade me to, because the date was etched into her memory too. What difference does it make, having it on the same day as my mother's? None. Besides, although Rick was my husband, I've had nothing to do with any of the arrangements. Keith and Elaine have taken care of all of the organising. Elaine will have done the majority of it, even though Keith will attempt to take the credit. Barely functioning, I've allowed them to take over and deal with it all. The choice of undertaker, flowers, coffin, readings, the newspaper announcement, it's all down to them. There has been a pretense made that I've been involved. Elaine would thrust a brochure or a picture in front of me and ask if I liked it, and I would reply with a yes or a nod, scarcely registering what I was seeing. I don't care about any of it. If it was up to me, I wouldn't bother with a funeral because I don't need the ritual of a crematorium, flowers, and a wake to say my goodbyes to Rick. He's gone and is never coming back. And all of this is for other people, mostly colleagues and acquaintances of Rick's who I barely know. They weren't a part of our lives together. Today is something that has to be got through, because it's what's expected when someone dies. It's the norm. It's required. Expected. What would Rick make of it all? Would he care what sort of funeral he had? What music is played as the coffin is carried into the crematorium? I honestly don't know, because it wasn't something we'd ever discussed or even thought about. We'd been married for a year, and being young, death and funerals weren't on the radar. Talk about such stuff was for old people who'd fully lived their lives, not us. We had time on our side, and decades of life to be lived ahead of us. Only he didn't. All right, lovey. Elaine pats my hand and peers into my face, a look of concern on her own. She's wearing the same black dress and jacket that she wore to Mum's funeral, and I assume it's only the second time she's worn it. She must have put a bit of weight on since Mum died, though, because the dress is a bit snug and she keeps tugging it down over her knees every time she moves. She bought it especially for Mum's funeral, and I know it was expensive. Not because she told me, but because I'd looked at it for myself and discounted it as a bit too old for someone of my age. It looked good on Elaine 2 years ago, and it still does now, despite her constant tugging of the skirt. It's an elegant style and perfectly suited for a 57-year-old woman. The age Mum would be too now, were she alive. When I nod, she pats my hand again and gives it a squeeze. The warmth and feel of her fingers is comforting, reassuring. Without Elaine to look after me, I think I would have curled up into a ball and given up on living. In her loving way, she's practically dragged me out of bed every morning and forced me to continue to function, telling me that the dark days will get better. I'm not sure if I believe her. I look down at her hand on mine. My fingers are ice cold and have been since the accident. I can't seem to get warm, no matter how many layers of clothes I wear or how high the heating thermostat is turned up. The rattle of a smoker's cough reminds me that Elaine's husband Keith is sitting on the other side of me, in the back of the car. He's staring stoically out of the window as we're driven to the crematorium, and there's a slight whistle as he breathes in and out through his nose. There's a faint aroma of his citrus aftershave and cigarette smoke, and I sense his impatience for it all to be over, so we can get to the wake and he can sink his first pint. Not that I blame him. I want it to be over too. Another 5 minutes and we'll be there. The circus will begin and we'll go through the motions, say the right things, and pretend that all this is bringing some sort of comfort and closure. Rick would think the wake a waste of money, as he's not here to enjoy it. I suddenly have the urge to laugh at the thought, but stop myself for fear of appearing hysterical. At least the first part of it is over. The very worst part, which was the hearse leaving our house with Rick's coffin inside. The funeral director in his black suit walking slowly and solemnly in front of the vehicle, his expression fixed. I'd forgotten they do that. They did the same for Mum 2 years ago, and it was a shock then. I'd had no idea they were going to do it because I'd never been to a funeral and had no clue what to expect. There was something unbelievably sad and final about it, and I found it worse than the funeral itself. I lost it completely then, as we slowly followed the hearse up the street. I recall screaming and crying that I couldn't bear it, that Mum couldn't be dead, that I couldn't go on. Keith and Elaine couldn't hide their horror at my naked grief, and by the time we reached the crematorium, I had to be helped physically from the car, and once outside could barely walk. They held me up, one either side of me, and practically dragged me inside for the service. I thought I'd never recover from losing Mum. I didn't want to recover. I wanted to die too. And then Rick, the love of my life, came along and made me want to live again. And now he's gone, too. The road noise changes as the driver pulls the car smoothly onto the gravel driveway that leads to the crematorium, and I look up to see the squat, square building in the distance growing ever closer. I brace myself for what is to come. It's less than an hour, I remind myself. The service is less than an hour long. I can get through this. We come to a halt and I clamber out of the car behind Keith, as Elaine climbs out of the car on the other side. Flakes of snow flutter onto my face, dry and powdery, not like snow at all. The forecasters have predicted a cold snap and weather warnings have been issued, according to Elaine, who watches the weather like a hawk, always fearful of being snowed in, despite living in the centre of town. It's bitterly cold, and my thin black jacket and dress are no match for the blast of icy wind that whips my hair around my head. I should have worn it in a bun, but I've left it loose, the way Rick liked it, falling in soft waves to my shoulders and framing my face. He always told me that my naturally blonde hair was one of the first things he noticed about me. Once out of the car, Elaine takes my hand and grips it tightly, and I allow myself to be led like a child. The three of us enter the foyer, Keith leading the way. The celebrant is waiting with several other officials, and when she sees us, she breaks away from them and comes over to us. Her mouth is moving rapidly, with so many words, but I can't hear what she's saying. It's as if the sound has been turned off, and I'm in a vacuum watching from afar. Am I going to faint? I don't feel lightheaded, but I do feel strange, as if I'm not really here. Garrulous and bird-like, the celebrant Sheila, I think her name is, visited last week to find out everything about Rick's life, so she could write the service. When I try to remember what was said, all I can recall is her incessant twittering. Elaine was with me, so perhaps she filled in the gaps. I have a copy at home of what she's going to say, but haven't bothered to read it. Rick's life summed up in 3 pages. After a few minutes, she peels away from us, and although I haven't spoken a word, I realise that I don't need to. Nothing is expected of me today, except to be present. This thought gives me comfort. I don't have to do anything. We move now, entering the chapel of rest 3 abreast, and make our way to the front row, where we settle ourselves in the seats and sit in silence, crow-like in black. I stare up at the lectern and then at the plinth behind it, where the coffin will be placed, trying not to dwell on the curtains that will close at the end of the service. Off to the burners, that's what Rick would say, were he here. Once those curtains close, Rick will be gone, forever. The place is filling up now. The sound of footsteps, the murmuring of subdued voices, the rustle, as the orders of service are picked up from seats, penetrates my brain. I can hear again. Coughing, throat clearing, the creak of seats as people sit down. I make no attempt to turn my head and look at who's here. I'll meet them all as they leave. I remember this much from Mum's funeral. I hear Elaine mumble something about it being a good turnout to Keith. She said this about Mum's funeral, as if how many people turned up was important, when the person you loved most in the world was dead. Mum told me that when my grandparents were old, they made a hobby of going to acquaintances' funerals because they'd reached the age where it became a regular event. It was a bit of a day out, a chance to catch up with old friends, with a free lunch and drinks thrown in. That was how they described it. It used to make me laugh, although I have only hazy memories of my grandparents, as I was barely 4 years old when they died. Now, I can think of nothing worse than a funeral. Music starts to play and I recognise one of Rick's favourite songs, one of 3 that I chose. It was my only input to his funeral. There's the sound of doors opening, and this time I can't stop from turning my head to look behind me, because I know what's happening. They're bringing in the coffin. 4 black-suited undertakers are carrying him, their eyes fixed straight ahead as they proceed slowly down the aisle. The coffin looks small between the 4 men, yet Rick was over 6 feet tall. 6'2", as he always said, not to forget those 2 inches. How can someone so full of life be reduced to something inside a wooden box? No longer a person, just a body. He was here one day and gone the next. How can that be? I turn away so I can't see the progression of the coffin. I can't watch. Instead, I look around to discover that every seat in here is occupied. We have friends, but not this many. But Rick has a lot of work colleagues. I have no family, and I assumed that few, if any, of Rick's relatives would bother to attend, as he didn't bother keeping in contact with any of them. His parents are long dead, and he wasn't close to his only sister, and hasn't seen her for years. Despite us being married, I've never even met her. She's younger than Rick, and I've never seen so much as a photograph of her. Is she here? Would she bother coming to the funeral of a brother she'd had no contact with for years? Would she even know he's dead? Elaine made sure that the undertakers placed the obituary in several newspapers, but not everyone reads the obituaries. I never do. Rick was a forcer's brat, as he put it, constantly moving home. He was sent to boarding school at age 11 and then spent holidays with his friends, not his parents, who were posted overseas, hence the lack of a relationship with his sister. She was never a part of his life, and when we got married it was in a registry office, just the two of us, with 2 hired witnesses. We told our small circle of friends about it afterwards, pretending it was an impulsive, romantic act, when of course it was no such thing. It isn't possible to get married without giving a month's notice. Elaine touches my arm, bringing me back to the present, and I turn around to face the front. She's speaking, Shirley, the celebrant. I zone out, having no desire to hear her sanitized version of Rick's life. Will anyone here recognize the man they knew? I stare at the floor and wish for it all to be over. We pull into the car park and come to a halt, right outside the entrance of the hotel. Too late, I realise that I should have shown more interest in where we were going to have the wake. I vaguely remember Elaine waving a brochure in front of me for a hotel, but it didn't register that it was for the Regency Arms. Not that there's anything wrong with the place. It's just the right side of posh, which means it's not intimidating, but they know their stuff. It has a very good restaurant, so although we're not having a full-on meal, the buffet food will be top-notch and the service excellent. No pale sausage rolls with pink meat or curled-up sandwiches here, so, in theory, it's the perfect venue. Elaine would have had no clue that it was the very last place on earth I would have chosen to celebrate the life of my lately deceased husband. It has very bad memories for both myself and Rick. I push the thought away. I have enough to cope with as it is. If I allow the memories of that night to invade my brain, I'm done for and won't be able to get through the rest of it. Ready? Elaine grips my hand tightly, and although I love her dearly, right now I want to push her away and run for the hills. I think she's worried that I'll chicken out, as I overheard Keith saying to her when I fled the crematorium as soon as the doors were opened after the service. Protocol dictated that I should go into the Garden of Remembrance and greet the other mourners after the service. I should look at the flowers, accept condolences, thank people for coming. I couldn't bring myself to do any of it. As the curtains closed on the coffin, it was as much as I could manage to remain in my seat. Had the doors been open then, I would have run full pelt from that place to put distance between myself and the thought of what was going to happen to Rick's body. When I climbed into the back of the waiting car, at the front of the crematorium, the driver looked shocked, although he tried to hide it. I remained there, drawing in juddering breaths, until Elaine came and found me. So here we are, and yet again, I want to run, escape, pretend this isn't happening. I sense that Keith is itching to get out of the car so he can get to the bar, but Elaine will have warned him that I need to be the first to arrive. Elaine and Mum were best friends since their school days, closer than sisters and always there for each other. But Mum never liked Keith, though she tried her hardest to, and she couldn't understand why Elaine married him. Mum never thought he was good enough for her, although she tried to hide it for Elaine's sake. I think Keith knew how she felt, as they were always cool whenever they were in each other's company. Keith and I have little to say to each other, despite Elaine being like a second mother to me. But I always strive to remain polite. Mum often said to me that Keith doesn't like anyone or anything except for his daily pint and cigarette. Yes, I'm ready. I sit up straight, square my shoulders and inhale a deep breath. Time to get on with it. Get it over with. After today, I have to move on. No more opting out of life. This is the better bit, love, Elaine says, squeezing my hand. Everyone can remember Rick and all the good times. It'll be okay. I manage a smile of sorts, and she looks reassured, although I don't believe her for 1 minute. It wasn't the best bit of Mum's funeral. There was no best bit. I'll try to put a brave front on for Elaine's sake. She treats me like the daughter she never had and always has done, even when Mum was alive because, as she says, Keith and I were never blessed. With another pat and squeeze of my hand, she releases her hold on me and gets out of the car, waiting as I clamber out behind her. We stand for a moment and stare up at the imposing facade of the Regency Arms. Forcing down the horrible memory of that night, I walk purposefully towards the hotel entrance. Let's get it over with. Chapter 4. Megan. By the time people start to arrive, I'm clutching a large gin and tonic and feeling the better for it. Distinctly unwise because my tolerance for alcohol is nil, but I don't care because I need it to get through the next few hours. I've already drunk half of it, but am making a conscious effort to slow down because I haven't eaten today and it'll go straight to my head. Elaine tried to persuade me to have some toast this morning, but I have zero appetite. I'm gearing myself up to visit the buffet to force some food down in an attempt to soak up the gin, because I know I'll be having more than one drink. Keith is already on his 3rd pint. The first one barely touched the sides, and as I watched him drink it, I marvelled at how such a skinny little man could swallow nearly half a pint in one go without any effort. Whose mouth is that big? He put me in mind of a snake swallowing a rodent. He'll be intent on getting his fill of the free bar because the beer is his payment for taking a day off work to be here. He's not completely skinny. A small pouch-like beer gut hangs over the top of his trousers, making his arms and legs look even more stick-like. Elaine, bless her, keeps flicking nervous glances at him, but he's ignoring her. It's free and he's taking full advantage of it. And if she dares to question him, it'll be, for fuck's sake, leave me alone, woman. As Mum often said to me, what the hell possessed Elaine to marry him? I've often wondered the same. Despite Keith, Mum remained devoted to Elaine and never allowed him to intrude on their friendship. Love is truly blind. Being here isn't as awful as I thought it would be, even though I know it's a false feeling and due to the alcohol I don't care. It's making it more bearable, so I'm definitely having more. A thumping hangover will be a small price to pay for getting me through this. It helps that I've never been in this room before, so there are no memories here to ambush me. This is a private function room and not open to the general public. As people have arrived, they've come over to speak to me, given me their condolences, shared a little of their memories of Rick, and then faded away with relief as more people have turned up to take their turn. Our little clique of friends have insisted that I sit at their table, and I've left my jacket there on a chair reserved especially for me, although I've absolutely no intention of sitting down. When I've finished greeting everyone, I'll wander from table to table because if I stop, I'll crumble. I have to keep moving. Elaine continues to helicopter around me to make sure that I'm okay, and even when she leaves me, I sense her watching me from the sidelines. Please make sure to get yourself a drink, I say to Jake, one of Rick's work colleagues, who's the last to arrive. Bespectacled and bearded, his relief at my letting him know that he can go now is almost palpable. He's done his duty and can now reward himself with a much-needed drink. I watch as he trudges to the bar, one of his workmates turning to greet him. Background music is playing, some sort of classical arrangement. Probably the same music the hotel plays for the corporate training courses they host. I turn to begin my round of the tables when a late arrival comes through the doorway. A girl. Around my age and slightly built. She has shoulder-length white blonde hair, very similar to mine, only hers is an expensive job from a salon. I can always tell. People always assume that my hair isn't naturally blonde because it's so light, and no adult could possibly have hair like this. I do. The girl's face is pale and devoid of makeup, and her huge blue eyes are swimming with tears. She's also very obviously pregnant. Her gaze settles on me, and she comes towards me, gives me a shaky smile, and takes my hand in hers. I'm so sorry we have to meet like this. I stare at her with a quizzical expression. I'm Emily, Ricky's sister. Her mouth twists downwards when she says his name, and the tears in her eyes look dangerously close to overflowing. Oh, is all I can manage to say. She steps forward, wraps her arms around me, and pulls me to her. I stand frozen, my arms hanging stiffly by my sides. I don't do hugging, especially not with strangers. She takes a sharp intake of breath and judders, and I realise she's crying. We stand awkwardly like this for a while as she sobs, until eventually she pulls away from me. God, I'm so sorry. She stares into my eyes. How completely selfish of me. You've lost your husband and I'm making it all about me. He was your brother, I say stiffly, wishing I could cry like her. What a release that would be. I haven't cried once since the accident. Got to let it out, eh? She gives a shaky smile. I'd only just managed to track him down, but I'm too late now, aren't I? I thought I had the rest of my life to rebuild my relationship with him. But it turns out I don't. I don't answer but take hold of her hand, surprising myself. Oh, come on, let's get a drink and find you a seat so we can talk. I lead her towards the bar and once there swiftly drink the rest of my gin and tonic and order myself another. Unwise, but I find I don't care. What would you like? Just a water, please. She waves a hand at her bump, and jealousy engulfs me, shocking me with its intensity. Rick and I will never have a baby now. Our future is gone. Dead. I've never wanted a baby, but who knows if I would have changed my mind in the future. I no longer have the opportunity to find out. So when did you last see Rick? Oh, 9 years ago. She looks down at the floor, at our uncle's funeral. Oh, I know. We promised to keep in touch, but we weren't close, what with us both sent to different boarding schools at such a young age. I wanted to remedy that, though. Finding out I was pregnant made me see how important family is, despite the lack of interest from our parents. I thought this could be a new start. Her bottom lip trembles, and I hand her the glass of water the barman has just put on the bar. She takes a gulp. I never even knew Ricky was married until I saw the obituary. I was surprised when I saw it because I always assumed he was like me.